The thunderous sound of hooves pounding across the dusty plains nearly drowned out the gunshots echoing behind Lucas Nolan as he pushed his stallion to its limits. Blood trickled down his arm, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the ache in his chest. 20 minutes ago, his younger brother James had been alive, laughing about their successful cattle sale in Dry Creek. Now, James was dead, his body left in the dirt while Lucas fled from the same bandits who had ambushed them on their way home to the Double N Ranch. It was 1878 in the Arizona Territory, and the promise of a new life had turned to ash in Lucas's mouth. At 32 years old, he'd seen his share of death, but nothing had prepared him for watching his only brother fall from his horse with 3 bullets in his chest, blue eyes staring emptily at the vast sky above. Lucas didn't stop riding until his horse could go no further. As the animal's sides heaved beneath him, he finally allowed himself to slump forward, his own breathing ragged with exertion and grief. Night was falling fast over the desert landscape, and he knew he couldn't return for James's body until morning. The thought of his brother lying alone under the stars tore at him worse than the bullet graze on his arm. In the distance, a faint light flickered a homestead of some kind. Lucas straightened in his saddle, weighing his options. He needed to tend his wound, rest his horse, and gather his thoughts before he could do anything else. With reluctance, he nudged his exhausted mount toward the promise of civilization. The modest ranch house came into view as he approached, a small barn and corral beside it. A woman stood on the porch, rifle raised and aimed directly at him. Even in the fading light, he could see she held it with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. "That's far enough, stranger," she called, her voice steady despite the obvious threat in her stance. Lucas raised his uninjured arm slowly. "Madam, I mean no harm. I've been shot and my horse is spent. I'm just looking for a place to rest before morning." The rifle didn't waver. "There's been talk of bandits in these parts. How do I know you're not one of them?" "Those same bandits killed my brother today," Lucas said, his voice breaking on the last word. "I'm Lucas Nolan. We ran the Double N about 15 miles northeast of here." After a long moment of scrutiny, the woman lowered her rifle slightly. "I've heard of your ranch." She hesitated before adding, "You're bleeding." "Yes, madam." She stepped into better light, and Lucas could see her now, auburn hair pulled back from a face that might once have been soft but had been hardened by the unforgiving sun and even more unforgiving circumstances. She couldn't have been more than 25, but her eyes carried the weight of someone much older. "I'm Abigail Grayson," she said finally. "You can stable your horse and come inside, but I'll keep this rifle close, Mr. Nolan." "I wouldn't expect anything less, Mrs. Grayson." "Miss Grayson will do," she corrected, though something in her expression suggested this wasn't entirely accurate. Lucas dismounted with difficulty, his injured arm protesting the movement. He led his horse to the small barn where Abigail directed him, and by the time he'd unsaddled the animal and given it water, his head was swimming with exhaustion and blood loss. Inside the modest house, Abigail gestured to a chair at her kitchen table. Without ceremony, she set down her rifle, though still within reach, and gathered supplies from a nearby cabinet. "Remove your shirt," she instructed, placing a basin of water on the table. Lucas complied, wincing as the dried blood stuck to the fabric. Abigail worked in silence, cleaning the bullet graze with practiced hands. "This isn't your first time treating a gunshot wound," he observed. A shadow passed across her face. "No, it isn't." As she wound a clean bandage around his arm, Lucas studied her more closely. No wedding ring, but a faded band of lighter skin suggested she'd worn one until recently. The house showed signs of a man's presence, boots by the door that were too large for her, a hat hanging on a peg that would have swallowed her head. "Your husband?" he asked quietly. Abigail's hands stilled for just a moment. "Died 3 months ago. Bandits attacked while he was bringing supplies back from town." Her voice was flat, as though she'd rehearsed the words until they lost their power to hurt her. "I buried him myself." The parallels between their situations weren't lost on Lucas. "I'm sorry," he said, the words inadequate but sincere. She tied off his bandage with a sharp tug. "Your brother, will you go back for him?" At first light, I couldn't fight off those men alone, but they've likely moved on by now." Abigail nodded, returning the medical supplies to their place. "You should eat something, then you can take the cot in the back room." Lucas wanted to refuse, to insist he could sleep in the barn, but the truth was he could barely keep his eyes open. He accepted the simple meal she offered: beans, bread, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Neither spoke as they ate, the weight of their respective losses filling the small kitchen more completely than words ever could. Later, lying on the narrow cot, Lucas stared into the darkness. James had been just 24, full of life and plans for the future. Their parents had died of fever 5 years earlier, leaving the brothers to run the ranch together. Now Lucas was truly alone. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and plagued by dreams of James calling for help while Lucas remained frozen, unable to reach him. He woke before dawn to the smell of coffee. Abigail was already dressed, loading ammunition into her rifle with swift, practiced movements. "I'm coming with you," she said without preamble when he entered the kitchen. Lucas frowned. "That's not necessary, Miss Grayson. It wasn't a question, Mr. Nolan." She met his gaze directly. "No one should have to bury family alone." The simple statement pierced through his grief. He'd been preparing himself to face that awful task by himself, steeling his heart against what he would find. The unexpected offer of companionship from a stranger who nonetheless understood exactly what he was facing momentarily robbed him of words. "Thank you," he managed finally. They rode out as the first rays of sun painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Abigail sat easily on her horse, a sturdy bay mare, keeping pace with Lucas as he retraced his frantic flight from the previous day. She'd brought shovels and canvas to wrap James's body. Her practicality was both jarring and comforting. The journey took nearly 2 hours, the landscape growing more familiar with each passing mile. When Lucas spotted the distinctive rock formation where the ambush had taken place, his heart began to race. He slowed his horse, suddenly afraid of what he would find. "It's just ahead," he said, voice rough. Abigail nodded, allowing him to lead. They crested a small rise, and Lucas's breath caught in his throat. James's body lay where he had fallen, but something was different. Someone had covered him with his own duster, arranged his arms across his chest, and placed his hat over his face, a gesture of respect unexpected in these lawless territories. Lucas dismounted slowly, approaching his brother's body with reverence. When he lifted the hat, he had to turn away. Death had already begun its work in the desert heat. Abigail was beside him instantly, a steadying presence at his elbow. "We should bury him here," she said softly. "It's not safe to transport him now." Lucas nodded, unable to speak. Together they selected a spot beneath a lone cottonwood tree, the only substantial shade for miles. The digging was hard work in the packed earth, but Abigail never complained, matching Lucas' shovel for shovel despite her smaller frame. As they worked, Lucas found himself telling her about James, his quick laugh, his skill with horses, the way he could charm anyone from crusty ranch hands to proper ladies in town. Abigail listened, occasionally asking a question that prompted another memory, another story. When the grave was deep enough, they wrapped James's body in canvas and lowered it with as much dignity as they could manage. Lucas's hands shook as he removed his bandana and tied it around a crude wooden cross he'd fashioned from branches. "Would you like to say something?" Abigail asked, standing respectfully at his side. Lucas opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. How could he possibly sum up his brother's life, their bond, everything that had been lost? He shook his head helplessly. To his surprise, Abigail spoke instead. "May the earth hold you gently, James Nolan. May your spirit find peace, and may those who loved you find comfort in knowing you will not be forgotten." She paused, then added softly, "Ashes to ashes, dust to dust." The simple eulogy broke something in Lucas. He dropped to his knees beside the fresh mound of earth, tears finally coming after hours of numb shock. Abigail's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, offering silent support as he grieved. When at last he could stand, Lucas turned to face her. "Thank you," he said simply. Abigail nodded, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "We should go. It's not safe to linger." They mounted up, but before they could ride away, Lucas noticed something glinting in the dirt near where James had fallen. Dismounting again, he discovered his brother's pocket watch a family heirloom passed down from their grandfather. The bandits had overlooked it in their haste. Lucas clutched the watch tightly, a tangible connection to his brother and all they had lost. As he climbed back into the saddle, he made a silent vow. The men who had done this would pay. Somehow he would find them and ensure justice was served. The ride back to Abigail's ranch was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. When the small homestead came into view, Lucas realized he had no real plan beyond this moment. He should return to the Double N, see to the cattle and hands, but the thought of facing that empty house was almost unbearable. As if reading his thoughts, Abigail said, "You should stay another night. Your arm needs rest, and there's no sense pushing yourself when you're grieving." Lucas wanted to protest, but found he had no strength for it. "If you're sure it's no trouble, it's no trouble," she dismounted smoothly. "Besides, I have a proposition for you, Mr. Nolan." Intrigued despite his exhaustion, Lucas followed her inside. After they had cared for the horses and Abigail had checked his wound healing cleanly, she set about preparing a simple meal. It wasn't until they were seated at her table that she spoke again. "These bandits," she began, her eyes fixed on her plate. "The ones who killed your brother, did you get a good look at them?" Lucas nodded slowly. 4 men. Their leader had a scar across his left cheek, rode a distinctive black horse with white stockings. One was missing 2 fingers on his right hand. They weren't just random outlaws, they knew what they were doing. Abigail's knuckles whitened around her fork. "The same men killed my husband, Thomas. I saw them from the window as they rode away." The implications of her statement hung in the air between them. "You're tracking them," Lucas said. "It wasn't a question. I've been gathering information. They've hit 3 other ranches and a stagecoach in the last 4 months." She finally met his gaze. "I plan to find them, Mr. Nolan. That's my proposition. Help me track these men and we'll both have our justice." Lucas studied her face, seeing the same determination that burned in his own heart. "It's dangerous work, Miss Grayson. No offense meant, but I'm a woman." Her smile held no humor. "I can shoot as well as any man, Mr. Nolan, and I have nothing left to lose." That, at least, was something Lucas understood perfectly. "Neither do I," he admitted, "but 2 people against 4 killers are still poor odds. I'm not suggesting we face them alone. There's a marshal in Silver Springs who's been building a case against them. With what we know, what we've seen, we could help him bring them in." Lucas considered her words. The thought of legal justice seemed hollow compared to the vengeance he craved, but it was a starting point. "All right," he agreed finally. "We'll ride to Silver Springs. After that, we'll see." Relief washed over Abigail's face, quickly masked by a businesslike nod. "We'll leave tomorrow. It's a 2-day ride." That night, Lucas slept more soundly than he would have thought possible, James's watch tucked beneath his pillow. In the morning, he found Abigail already preparing for their journey, packing supplies and ammunition with efficient movements. "I need to send word to my ranch," Lucas said. "I have hands who will be wondering what happened." Abigail handed him paper and a pencil without comment. He wrote a brief note explaining James's death and his plan to seek justice, asking his foreman to manage things in his absence. They could leave it at a way station for delivery. As they prepared to ride out, Lucas took a moment to truly look at the small ranch Abigail was leaving behind. "Your husband built this place," she nodded, her expression softening slightly. "From nothing. We came out here 3 years ago with little more than a wagon of supplies and big dreams." Her voice caught. "He was a good man. He didn't deserve to die in the dirt like that." "Neither did James," Lucas said quietly. Their eyes met in silent understanding. Whatever happened in the days ahead, they were bound by the common thread of their losses and their determination to see justice done. The journey to Silver Springs took them through increasingly rough country. They traveled cautiously, aware that the bandits might still be operating in the area. At night, they took turns keeping watch, though Lucas noticed Abigail often stayed awake long after her shift should have ended, her eyes scanning the darkness with fierce intensity. During the long hours of riding, they shared stories of their lives. Lucas learned that Abigail had come west from Pennsylvania after her parents died. following her new husband's dream of building a cattle ranch. She spoke of Thomas with a mixture of love and lingering grief that resonated deeply with Lucas's own feelings about his brother. In turn, he told her about growing up on the Double N, about his parents' struggle to establish the ranch, and how he and James had expanded it after their deaths. He found himself laughing as he recounted some of James's more outrageous exploits, surprised that the memories could bring anything but pain. "He sounds like he lived fully," Abigail observed after one such story. "That's something to hold on to." They camped the second night in a sheltered canyon, a small fire providing warmth against the desert's rapid cooling. As they shared a meal of beans and jerky, Lucas noticed Abigail shivering slightly despite her proximity to the flames. Without thinking, he removed his coat and placed it around her shoulders. "The nights get cold out here," he said when she looked up in surprise. "Thank you." She pulled the coat tighter, her fingers lingering on the worn fabric. After a moment of comfortable silence, she asked, "What will you do?" Lucas poked at the fire with a stick. "I haven't thought that far ahead. The ranch needs running, I suppose." Alone, the question hung between them, laden with unspoken understanding of what that word truly meant. Seems that way now. He looked up at the stars scattered across the vast sky. "What about you?" Abigail was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. "I don't know if I can go back to that empty house," she admitted finally, "but I'm not sure where else I would go." The vulnerability in her voice stirred something protective in Lucas. This woman who had helped him bury his brother, who rode like she was born in the saddle and could likely outshoot half the men he knew, suddenly seemed very young and very alone. "You'll figure it out," he said, inadequate but sincere. "And you don't have to decide right away." She gave him a small smile, the first genuine one he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, hinting at the woman she might have been before grief carved its lines into her features. "We should get some rest," she said, handing back his coat despite his protests. "I'll take first watch." Silver Springs appeared on the horizon late the following afternoon, a sprawling town that served as a hub for several mining operations in the area. Compared to the tiny settlement near the Nolan Ranch, it was practically a city, with proper streets and two-story buildings lining the main thoroughfare. They stabled their horses at the livery and made their way to the marshal's office, dust from the trail still clinging to their clothes. Marshal Frank Wilson was a grizzled man in his 50s, his badge worn with the same casual familiarity as his well-used gun belt. "Miss Grayson," he greeted Abigail with a respectful nod. "I didn't expect to see you back so soon. I've brought you information, Marshal. This is Lucas Nolan. His brother was killed by the same men who murdered my husband." Wilson's expression darkened. "When?" 3 days ago," Lucas answered. "Near the Double N Ranch." The marshal gestured for them to sit, pulling out a map marked with several X's in red ink. "I've been tracking these bastards for months. They hit here, here, and here." He pointed to various locations. "Always the same pattern, small ranches, travelers with valuable cargo, all just isolated enough that help won't come quickly." "The leader has a scar on his left cheek," Abigail said, leaning forward. Wilson nodded grimly. "Jed Blackwell. Spent 5 years in Yuma Territorial Prison for armed robbery. The scar was a parting gift from a guard he tried to kill during an escape attempt." "Blackwell," Lucas repeated, committing the name to memory. "What about the others, brothers Tom and Ellie Ryder? The fourth man is called Mick Doyle, mean as snakes, all of them." Wilson sighed heavily. "Problem is, they're smart. They don't stay in one area long enough to get caught, and witnesses have a habit of ending up dead." "We're still breathing," Lucas pointed out. "For now," Wilson agreed, "and I aim to keep it that way. I've got a lead they might be holed up in an abandoned mining camp about 20 miles north of here. I was planning to ride out tomorrow with a couple of deputies." Abigail straightened in her chair. "We're coming with you." Wilson shook his head firmly. "No, madam. This isn't a job for civilians, especially not a woman." Abigail finished, her voice dangerously quiet. "Those men killed my husband, Marshal. I identified them for you when no one else could. And my brother died with 3 of their bullets in his chest," Lucas added. "We have as much right to see justice done as anyone." The marshal studied them both for a long moment. You're both set on this, I can see that, but I can't have you interfering with lawful arrests. If you come, you follow my orders without question. Is that clear?" They nodded in unison. "All right then. Get yourselves rooms at the hotel, clean up, get a decent meal. We ride at dawn." Outside the marshal's office, Abigail and Lucas stood in the fading light of day, the reality of what lay ahead settling over them. "We're close," Abigail said softly. "I can feel it." Lucas nodded, his hand unconsciously moving to the pocket where James's watch rested. One more day. They secured rooms at the modest hotel and parted to clean away the trail dust. Lucas took advantage of the bathhouse, scrubbing away days of grief and travel. When he emerged, wearing clean clothes from his saddlebags, he felt almost human again. Abigail was waiting in the small dining room, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders, damp from her own bath. She wore the same practical riding clothes, but freshly laundered. Even so, the transformation was remarkable. Without the layer of dust and with some of the tension eased from her features, she was strikingly beautiful. The realization caught Lucas off guard. Since meeting her, he'd seen her as a fellow sufferer, an ally in his quest for justice. He hadn't allowed himself to notice her as a woman. Now, as she looked up and offered a small smile, he felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. "You clean up well, Mr. Nolan," she observed as he took the seat across from her. "As do you, Miss Grayson." He cleared his throat. "And perhaps, given what we've been through together, Lucas and Abigail would be more fitting." Her smile widened slightly. "I suppose you're right, Lucas." They ordered a proper meal, the first either had enjoyed in days, and found themselves lingering over coffee as the dining room emptied around them. Their conversation drifted from preparations for tomorrow to memories of their loved ones, somehow less painful to share in the softly lit room with full stomachs and the promise of justice on the horizon. "Thomas always said I was too stubborn for my own good," Abigail said with a wistful smile. "When I insisted on learning to shoot, to ride like him, to help with the ranch work, he complained, but I think he was proud too." Lucas nodded. "James was the same about my cooking, teased me mercilessly, but he never turned down a plate." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when the proprietor came to inform them the dining room was closing. They walked together to the top of the stairs where their rooms lay in opposite directions. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Lucas said quietly, "I'm glad we found each other." "I couldn't have faced this alone." Abigail met his gaze steadily. "Neither could I." For a moment, something electric passed between them, an awareness that transcended their shared grief. Then Abigail dropped her eyes, a flush coloring her cheeks. "Good night, Lucas. Sleep well." Before he could respond, she had turned and walked swiftly to her room, leaving him standing in the dimly lit hallway with the phantom sensation of what it might have felt like to kiss her. Dawn broke cold and clear, the town still slumbering as 5 riders gathered outside the marshal's office. Wilson had brought 2 deputies, as promised, young men with serious expressions and well-maintained weapons. They regarded Abigail with poorly concealed skepticism until she checked and loaded her rifle with practiced efficiency, never missing a beat in Wilson's briefing about the abandoned mining camp. "If they're there, we approach cautious like," the marshal instructed. "These men won't hesitate to shoot, and they're good at it. Our aim is to take them alive if possible, but staying alive ourselves is the priority." "Understood." Everyone nodded, mounting up for the long ride north. Lucas found himself riding beside Abigail, watching her from the corner of his eye. She sat straight in the saddle, her expression determined, showing no sign of the vulnerability she'd revealed the previous evening. In the early morning light, with her hair braided tightly and her rifle across her lap, she looked every inch a frontier woman capable, resilient, and dangerous to cross. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they followed an old mining road into the foothills. By midday, the abandoned camp came into view, a collection of weathered structures clinging to the hillside, the remains of what had once been a bustling silver operation. Marshal Wilson signaled for them to dismount and approach on foot. They left their horses in a stand of scrub pine and advanced cautiously, spreading out as Wilson had instructed. The camp appeared deserted at first glance, but as they drew closer, Lucas spotted fresh horse droppings near what had once been the assay office. He caught Wilson's eye and pointed silently. The marshal nodded, gesturing for them to take cover. They were preparing to move forward when a shot rang out, splintering wood inches from Abigail's head. She dropped to the ground instantly, rolling behind an overturned cart as more gunfire erupted from the buildings above. 4 shooters, Wilson called out from behind a boulder. Blackwell and his boys, for sure. Lucas had taken cover behind the remnants of a stone wall, his heart hammering in his chest. Across the clearing, he could see Abigail peering around the edge of the cart, her rifle ready. Their eyes met briefly, and she nodded once, a silent communication that she was unhurt and prepared. "Blackwell," Wilson shouted. "This is Marshal Wilson. You and your men are surrounded. Throw down your weapons and come out with your hands up." Mocking laughter was the only response, followed by another volley of gunfire that kept them all pinned down. "We need to flank them," Lucas called to Wilson. The marshal nodded grimly. "Taylor, you and Adams circle around to the left. Nolan, you take the right. Miss Grayson and I will keep them occupied from here." Abigail's head snapped up. "No, I'm going with Lucas." Wilson started to protest, but another burst of gunfire cut him off. Lucas met Abigail's determined gaze and found himself nodding. "We'll go together," he agreed. "Marshal, give us 3 minutes, then create a distraction." Without waiting for Wilson's approval, Lucas motioned for Abigail to follow him as he crept toward a narrow gully that would provide cover as they circled behind the buildings. They moved quickly, staying low, the sounds of sporadic gunfire covering their approach. As they reached the rear of what had once been the mine supervisor's office, Lucas could hear voices inside, rough, confident, unconcerned. These were men who believed themselves untouchable. Men who had killed James and Thomas without a second thought. Rage surged through Lucas, hot and blinding. He gripped his pistol tighter, ready to burst in and end this. Abigail's hand on his arm brought him back to his senses. "Together," she whispered, her eyes reflecting the same controlled fury he felt. Before they could move, Wilson's voice boomed from the front of the camp. "Last chance, Blackwell. Surrender now or we're coming in shooting." The distraction worked. They heard shuffling inside as the bandits moved to the windows facing the marshal. Lucas counted silently 1, 2, 3, then nodded to Abigail. They burst through the rear door simultaneously, weapons raised. "Don't move," Lucas shouted. 4 startled faces turned toward them. Lucas recognized them instantly: the scarred leader, Blackwell, the one-handed man, and 2 others who had haunted his nightmares for days. One of the men lunged for his gun, and Abigail fired without hesitation, the bullet striking his shoulder. He howled in pain, collapsing against the wall. "The next one goes through your head," she said, her voice deadly calm. "All of you, hands where we can see them, now." The remaining men, seeing the determination in their faces and hearing Wilson and his deputies approaching from the front, slowly raised their hands. Blackwell's eyes burned with hatred as he looked from Lucas to Abigail. "You're the woman from that little ranch south of here," he said, recognition dawning. "And you," he turned to Lucas, "we left you for dead with that other fellow." "That other fellow was my brother," Lucas said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "And the man you murdered at my ranch was my husband," Abigail added, understanding crossed Blackwell's face, followed by a cruel smile. "Well, ain't this fitting? Come to avenge your menfolk, have you? What makes you think you'll walk out of here alive?" The door behind them burst open as Wilson and his deputies entered, guns drawn. "Because they're not alone," the marshal answered. "Jed Blackwell, Tom and Ellie Ryder, McDoyle, you're all under arrest for murder, robbery, and whatever else I can think of on the ride back to Silver Springs." As the deputies moved forward to disarm and bind the outlaws, Lucas kept his gun trained steadily on Blackwell. The temptation to pull the trigger, to end the life of the man who had taken James from him, was nearly overwhelming. From the corner of his eye, he could see Abigail struggling with the same impulse, her finger tense on the trigger of her rifle. "It's not worth it," Wilson said quietly, seeming to read their thoughts. "These men will hang legally. You don't need their blood on your hands." Slowly, reluctantly, Lucas lowered his weapon. Beside him, Abigail did the same, though her eyes never left Blackwell's face. "This doesn't bring them back," she said, her voice barely audible. "No," Lucas agreed, feeling the weight of James's watch in his pocket, "but it's something." The journey back to Silver Springs was tense, the bandits secured to their horses and guarded closely by the entire party. When they finally rode into town late that evening, a crowd gathered to watch as the infamous outlaws were marched to the jail. Word of their capture spread quickly, and by the time Lucas and Abigail reached the hotel, several people stopped them to offer congratulations and thanks. "Seems Blackwell and his gang caused a lot of grief around here," Lucas observed as they stood once again at the top of the stairs outside their rooms. "And now it's over." Abigail's voice was flat, the triumph of their success already fading as reality settled in. "They'll stand trial, they'll hang, and then we go back to our lives," Lucas finished when she trailed off. She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "I should leave in the morning. The ranch will still be there in a few days," Lucas interrupted gently. "Stay for the preliminary hearing. Wilson says it's important to have witnesses present." Abigail hesitated, then nodded again. "All right, for the hearing." This time when they parted for the night, Lucas fought the urge to reach for her hand. Whatever connection had sparked between them seemed fragile in the wake of their success, as if the shared purpose that had bound them together was dissolving now that justice had been served. The hearing was held 3 days later, a brief but formal affair in which Lucas and Abigail both testified about the murders they had witnessed. The judge, a severe man with piercing eyes, wasted no time in binding the 4 men over for trial and denying bail. "The circuit judge will be here in 2 weeks," Wilson informed them afterward. "But you don't need to stay. Your written statements will suffice, and I'll make sure you're notified of the outcome." They stood on the boardwalk outside the courthouse, suddenly at a crossroads. Their mission was complete. Justice, or the promise of it, had been served. There was nothing left to keep them together, and yet Lucas found himself reluctant to say goodbye. "I suppose we both have homes to return to," he said finally. Abigail nodded, her eyes on the distant mountains. "Yes." An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words. Lucas thought of his empty ranch house, of the long days ahead without James's laughter to fill the rooms. He thought of Abigail returning to her own silent home, facing the same echoing emptiness. "Abigail," he began, not entirely sure what he wanted to say. She turned to him, her expression guarded yet hopeful. "Yes, Lucas hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I don't want to go back to an empty house, not yet, and I was thinking, there's a lot of open country between here and home. Maybe we could take the long way back, together." The guardedness in her eyes softened. "What exactly are you suggesting, Lucas?" "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted with a small smile. "Just that I'm not ready to say goodbye to you, and maybe neither of us has to face the emptiness alone." Abigail studied his face for a long moment. "The long way home," she repeated thoughtfully. "I think I'd like that." They set out the next morning, heading south but taking a circuitous route that would eventually lead them back toward their respective ranches. Without the urgency of pursuit or the weight of impending confrontation, they traveled at a leisurely pace, camping beneath the stars and talking late into the night. As days passed, Lucas found himself watching Abigail with growing admiration. She was strong yet vulnerable, capable yet willing to accept help when needed. The grief that had defined their first meeting gradually receded, not disappearing but making room for other emotions to surface. One evening, as they sat beside a small fire in a sheltered canyon, Abigail looked up from the shirt she was mending to find Lucas watching her. "What is it?" she asked, setting aside her work. "I was just thinking about how differently things might have turned out if I hadn't stopped at your ranch that night." She considered this. "You would have found the marshal eventually. Justice would have been done." "Maybe," Lucas agreed, "but I would have faced it alone, and so would you." Abigail's eyes reflected the firelight as she held his gaze. "We're still alone, Lucas. Justice doesn't change that, aren't we?" he asked softly, moving to sit beside her. "Alone, I mean," the question hung between them, fraught with meaning. Abigail's breath caught as Lucas reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I know it's too soon," he murmured, "for both of us, but I can't help feeling that maybe we found each other for a reason, more than just catching those men." Abigail closed her eyes briefly, leaning into his touch. "I've thought the same thing," she admitted, and felt guilty for thinking it. "Thomas hasn't been gone 6 months, and James only 2 weeks," Lucas said. "But they're gone, Abigail, and we're still here, still living." When she opened her eyes, they shimmered with unshed tears. "I don't know if I'm ready for whatever this is between us." "Neither do I," Lucas confessed, "but I know I'm not ready to lose it either." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward until their lips met in a gentle kiss. Abigail remained still for a heartbeat, then responded with a tenderness that made his chest ache. When they parted, her tears had spilled over, tracing silver paths down her cheeks. "It's not replacing them," Lucas said quietly, wiping away her tears with his thumb. "It's just continuing for both of us." Abigail nodded, unable to speak. She rested her forehead against his, and they stayed that way for a long moment, sharing breath and the simple comfort of human connection. Their journey continued, but with a subtle shift in dynamics. They rode closer together, their conversations deeper and more personal. At night, they slept side by side beneath the stars, sometimes talking until dawn about their hopes and fears, their memories and dreams. As they approached the area where their paths would naturally diverge, Lucas to the northeast, toward the Double N, Abigail south to her smaller homestead, a tension grew between them, unspoken but palpable. Finally, as they made camp for what might be their last night together, Lucas gathered his courage. "Come with me," he said simply as they sat beside the fire. To the Double N, Abigail looked up sharply. "What? Not forever if you don't want, but don't go back to that empty house, Abigail." "Not yet," he took her hands in his. "There's plenty of room at the ranch. You could stay as long as you like, help with the horses. You've mentioned how much you enjoy working with them." "Lucas, I'm not proposing marriage," he clarified quickly. "Not now, it's too soon for both of us. I'm just proposing more time together." Abigail was silent for a long moment, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "And if I came to the Double N, what would people think? A widow living unchaperoned with a bachelor." "To hell with what people think," Lucas said firmly. "We've both earned the right to find happiness where we can." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Is that what this is? Happiness?" Lucas considered the question seriously. "Not yet," he decided, "but I think it could be, given time." Abigail squeezed his hands gently. "I need to see my ranch, Lucas. I need to make sure everything is as it should be. I owe Thomas that much." Disappointment washed through him, though he tried not to show it. "I understand. But," she continued, her smile growing, "I don't have to stay there. The cattle can be sold, the property too, eventually, and until then, perhaps I could divide my time between my responsibilities there and here." She reached up to touch his face. "With you." Relief and joy surged through Lucas. He pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair. "I'll take whatever time you can give," he murmured. They rode to Abigail's ranch first, arriving as the sun cast long shadows across the modest homestead. It looked smaller than Lucas remembered, more fragile somehow. He watched as Abigail dismounted slowly, her expression a complex mixture of grief, nostalgia, and resolution as she surveyed what had been her home with Thomas. "Are you all right?" Lucas asked, coming to stand beside her. She nodded, her hand finding his. "It's just a house now. The home I thought I was building here, that died with Thomas." They spent 2 days setting the ranch in order. Abigail packed clothing and personal items she wished to take with her, while Lucas repaired a broken corral fence and made sure the small herd of cattle had adequate water. They didn't discuss the future beyond their immediate plans, but there was an understanding between them, a promise of possibility that neither was ready to name but both cherished. On the 3rd day, they rode out together toward the Double N, Abigail leading a pack horse loaded with her belongings. The journey took them past the cottonwood where James was buried, and they stopped to pay their respects. Lucas was surprised to find the pain of his loss, while still present, had softened somehow. Standing there with Abigail beside him, he felt a sense of continuity rather than ending. "He would have liked you," Lucas said as they prepared to continue their journey. Abigail smiled softly. "Thomas would have approved of you too. He always said I needed someone as stubborn as myself." They arrived at the Double N late in the day. The ranch hands, who had been managing in Lucas's absence, greeted them with barely concealed curiosity about the auburn-haired woman at his side. Lucas introduced Abigail simply as a friend who would be staying for a while, offering no further explanation. If the men had questions, they kept them to themselves. The main house was larger than Abigail's homestead, built by Lucas's father with an eye toward eventually filling it with family. As Lucas showed her to the guest room, he felt a strange mixture of nervousness and rightness, as if pieces of a puzzle were slowly falling into place. "It's beautiful," Abigail said, taking in the simple but comfortable furnishings. "Your mother had good taste." "She would have liked you," Lucas replied, echoing his earlier words about James. "She always said this house needed a woman's touch." Abigail raised an eyebrow. "Is that what I am, a woman's touch?" Lucas flushed. "That's not what I meant." She laughed, a sound he was hearing more frequently and treasured each time. "I'm teasing you, Lucas. I know what you meant." Days at the Double N fell into a comfortable rhythm. Abigail, true to her word, proved skilled with horses and soon took over much of their care. The ranch hands, initially skeptical, quickly came to respect her knowledge and work ethic. Lucas found himself watching her often, marveling at how naturally she fit into the life of the ranch and into his life. They still maintained separate rooms, both aware that healing takes time and that rushing would dishonor the memories of those they had lost. But each evening found them on the porch, talking late into the night, growing closer in mind and heart if not yet in body. A month passed, then two. Abigail rode to her ranch periodically to check on things, sometimes staying overnight but always returning to the Double N. Lucas never asked when or if she planned to leave permanently, afraid to disrupt the delicate balance they had achieved. One evening in late summer, as they sat watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of pink and gold, Abigail broke their companionable silence. "I've had an offer on my ranch," she said quietly. Lucas's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his voice steady. "A good offer," she nodded. "Fair, more than fair, actually. A family from back east. They have 3 sons who can work the land properly." "And are you considering it?" Abigail turned to look at him directly. "I've accepted it." Lucas exhaled slowly, afraid to hope. "I see. Do you?" There was a hint of challenge in her voice now. "Because I don't think you do, Lucas Nolan." He met her gaze, searching for clues in her expression. "Then tell me what I should be seeing." Abigail took his hand, her touch warm and sure. "I'm not going anywhere, not unless you want me to." The weight that had been pressing on Lucas's chest for weeks suddenly lifted. "I don't want you to go, not ever." "Good," she smiled, her eyes bright in the fading light. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Lucas. And that terrifies me, but not nearly as much as the thought of not being with you." Lucas pulled her into his arms, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "I love you too, Abigail. I think I have since that first day when you helped me bury James." "That's a rather morbid beginning to a love story," she murmured against his chest. "Maybe, but it's ours." He tilted her face up to his. "And I wouldn't change it because every step led us here." Their kiss was different from their first, not tentative but certain, not a question but an answer. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Lucas knew with absolute certainty that the emptiness that had threatened to consume him after James's death would never claim him again. 2 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Lucas and Abigail were married in Silver Springs with Marshal Wilson as a witness. The circuit judge who had sentenced Blackwell and his gang to hang performed the ceremony, a fitting symmetry to the journey that had brought them together. As they exchanged vows, Lucas thought of James, of all the moments his brother would miss, and felt a bittersweet pang. But when he looked into Abigail's eyes, shining with love and promise, he knew that their life together would be full of new moments, new memories to cherish. That night, as they lay together in what was now their shared bedroom, Abigail nestled against his side, her head on his chest. "I never thought I could be happy again," she confessed softly. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over." Lucas stroked her hair, understanding completely. "I felt the same way after losing James, like there was nothing ahead but emptiness." "And now," he smiled in the darkness, Now I see a future, our future, the ranch, maybe children someday, a life built together. Abigail propped herself up on one elbow, her face serious in the moonlight streaming through the window. They'll always be with us, you know, Thomas and James, part of our story. I know. Lucas kissed her gently, and we'll honor them by living fully the way they would have wanted. As winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer, the double N flourished under their combined care. Lucas expanded the cattle operation while Abigail started breeding horses, her natural affinity for the animals quickly earning a reputation that brought buyers from as far away as California. On the first anniversary of James's death, they rode together to the cottonwood tree where he was buried. Lucas had commissioned a proper headstone from Silver Springs, and they placed it together, along with wildflowers Abigail had gathered along the way. "He would be proud of you," Abigail said as they stood hand in hand beside the grave. "Of what you've built, of how you've continued despite your loss." Lucas squeezed her hand, thinking of how much had changed in a year. "He would have loved being an uncle," he said, his free hand coming to rest gently on Abigail's rounded belly. She smiled, covering his hand with her own. "I think this little one will hear plenty of stories about Uncle James and Uncle Thomas both. And about how his mother and father found each other through the darkest of times," Lucas added. As they rode back to the ranch to their home, Lucas thought about the twisted path that had led them here. Grief had brought them together, but love had kept them that way. From the ashes of their separate losses, they had built something new, something strong and enduring. The double N spread out before them as they crested the final hill, the buildings solid and welcoming in the afternoon sun. Lucas looked at Abigail, her face glowing with health and happiness despite the sadness of the day's remembrance, and felt a profound gratitude wash over him. "Welcome home," he said softly. Abigail's smile held all the promise of their shared future. "Home," she agreed, spurring her horse forward toward all that awaited them. And as they rode side by side into the life they were building together, Lucas knew with absolute certainty that while nothing could erase the pain of loss, love unexpected, unlooked for, but embraced with open hearts had the power to heal even the deepest wounds and to light the way forward into a future neither of them could have imagined in their darkest hours.